Okay, I am spotlighted, and that should be the warning to everybody that's about to get serious. Here we go. We're letting in the next few people. I want to welcome you to this Lunch and Learn and introduce myself. My name is Nolan Lebovitz, and I will be your cruise director for this Lunch and Learn. And we are going to have a great time together studying a text that is really inspiring for me. So I have to tell you that I love Purim. I absolutely love Purim. And then the few days after Purim, I sober to the idea that Passover is suddenly around the corner. And my love for Passover is not quite the same as my love for Purim. I grew up in a house where my mom used to wrap tinfoil around everything. And as a child, I understood that it would be easier to wrap my head in tinfoil than it would be to wrap everything around tinfoil. So if you're gonna be totally kosher for Passover, as we are, I take each of my kids and I wrap their heads in aluminum foil for 8 days, and then they get the idea of what they're supposed to eat and not eat. Of course, I'm kidding, so please don't call Child Protective Services. But I have to tell you that I wanted to teach something to get us in the Passover spirit, to create something meaningful about, setting our kind of spiritual Jewish compass towards the idea of the Seder and the preparation that goes involved, that's involved in creating the Seder, and away from Purim that we just passed only a few short days ago. And it's sad for me to think that it's going to be another, 360 something days until Purim again. But we transition to the very first Passover. So what I did is I prepared a presentation that we're going to learn from. Usually what happens during my Lunch and Learn experiences during my teaching is that everybody knows in advance the text that I'm going to teach, and we all have copies of the text, and we all go around and we read, and it's very interactive. But today, I was going to spring the text on everybody, and you didn't have a chance to get it in advance. So I decided to create a presentation so that we could all kind of read and enjoy the text together. I hope that's going to work for all of us. And here it is. So I just shared my screen and it just disappeared. What just happened? Hold on a second. Nope, there it is. Can everybody see the screen that says First Passover for Moses? Yes? Fantastic. Okay. Thank you for those of you who just gave me a thumbs up. Okay. So the question is, right? The question of what was the first Passover is answered very straightforward in the pshat of the text of the Torah. The pshat of the text makes us understand that the evening of the Makkah of the 10th plague, which is the slaying of the firstborn, Makat Bechorot, that's the 10th time we dip our finger in the wine and put it on our napkin or our plate or whatever your tradition is. Jews were at home, right? We were at home observing the very first Passover Seder. Everybody remembers the scene in the Ten Commandments? There'll be a whole repertoire of Jewish films that you'll have to watch in order to understand references. We'll begin with like the Ten Commandments and Frisco Kid and history, Our History of the World Part 1, Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles, things like that. We'll create a whole list of references of what you'll need to know in order to attend these teachings. But the first Passover for Moses really references the idea. In the Torah, references the Ten Commandments, the film, and the Ten Commandments film is, of course, referencing the Torah, about, Moses huddled with his family. They had already spread blood over the doorpost, and they had made the Paschal offering, and they were eating the Paschal offering as a family. That's what we see in the movie, and that's actually what is supported in the text. And the question is, after that, Midrash, rabbinic literature, gives us a glimpse of what the rabbis think Moses does for the rest of the night that I think is really inspiring for us to think about and consider and reflect on in anticipation of Passover. So what was Moses doing during the first Passover is the topic. That's what we're going to talk about for this period of time. And here we go. All right. So this is a shot of the text, right? This is the text, and this is a photograph of Moses from 1400 BCE. So the text simply states, right? Va'avarti ve'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh. That night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and to all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. Is this creating a sense of chaos if I ask if people would like to unmute themselves and read the next verse? I feel like is Jacqueline head going to explode if I ask if people would like to do that? It might explode, but let's try. No, yes, let's try. If anybody would like to unmute themselves and read verse 13. So this is God saying this is going to happen during the 10th plague, and during the 10th plague, go ahead. All you have to do is say your name first so that I know who's reading.
Lael Rubin.
Terrific. Thank you, Lael. Go ahead, read verse 13.
And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
Fantastic. Great reading. Very dramatic. And I have to tell you that I wanted to include that verse number one because, the blood on the doorpost is the reason why. That's the sign that God used to pass over these houses, as if God was unaware who lived in which houses and needed this kind of sign. Also, it remains the sign of Jewish homes because we interpret it to be the mezuzah today. And this pasuk of the book of Shemot, this verse from Exodus, is this verb, this passing over verb, ufasachti. If you see here, I'm going to highlight it for you. Let's see if I can do that. Ufasachti, that is the verb that gives Passover its name of Pesach, right? So it's derived directly out of this verse. And so this action that God is doing gives us the name of the holiday. And who would like to read verse 14?
Sure. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time.
Terrific. And so this is actually very similar to this is almost exactly the same verse as the one that I read out of Megillat Esther last night that I used as a proof text. This is that the Jewish people will make this zikaron, this will be remembered, right, as a chukat olam, as a law for the way that the world goes. For all time, this will be an observance for the Jewish people. Okay, so you can tell in Charlton Heston's face, this is a very serious group of verses, right? We turn now to Exodus 12, because we skip from Exodus 12 to 15, these three verses. We skip about 14 verses to the actual event. First, we're told what's going to happen, that there's going to be this plague of the firstborn, and then we skip down to actually seeing it unfold. And this over here, this frame is from the DreamWorks film Prince of Egypt. This is the Makat Bechorot. This is the angel of death coming to smite the Egyptians. Who'd like to read verse 29?
I'll read. Lois Weinsack. In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all firstborn cattle.
Right, and as a firstborn, I can tell you that I go the morning before Pesach begins. Right, I go to the fast of the firstborn service. Now I usually teach that morning, whichever Masechet I'm studying during the year. This year I'm studying Midot to lead that service, which is the attributes of the temple, of how you build the temple, how we will essentially rebuild the third temple. It's attracting the Talmud that talks about that. And as a firstborn and as a father of a firstborn, there's no verse that is quite makes me stop in my place when I read it, to think that every firstborn from the Pharaoh's house to the lowest Egyptian house, right, was experiencing death in the same moment. It's mind-boggling, and it's powerful. And who would like to read verse 30?
And it's unfair.
Well, we could, I don't know who just said that. That could have been the voice of a divine voice. Who just said, and it's unfair?
Gary Dosick.
Gary Dosick, right. So it is absolutely, if we wanted to put it in modern parlance, right, we could talk about the dropping of the bombs at the end of World War II. This is, was this 10th plague needed? Was the, the harshness of the 10th plague appropriate? These are the types of questions that I always say we have the luxury to ask as free people, as a people that enjoys many privileges that the people who read this text, who were part of this, situation, certainly did not. We enjoy that luxury.
But this is different than Hiroshima because God didn't drop the bomb on Hiroshima. People did.
That's right. That's right. It is different than Hiroshima. It's just the best analogy that I could use that ended a very, violent, unjust, troubling conflict with an extraordinary amount of force. That was the comparison that I was trying to create. And certainly, if you want to say that God is unjust, here you stand in a long tradition beginning with Abraham that says that God sometimes acts unjust. And I would say to you that I don't think that God has any intention of defending God's self to you, to Abraham, or to very many other people who have challenged God before. As a people, we are charged with the concept of wrestling with God. We are not promised the ability to understand God. And that's a very different position to sit in. Is that right, Gary? Okay. He's either longed off or he's starting to write a bad review of this teaching. Okay, so let's go on.
No, I was muted.
Oh, muted. Okay. Verse 31. Who would like to read? Because this is where our part gets good. So please let it be somebody who wants to read dramatically with gusto. Okay, I'll read. Oh, I feel like Sandy just unmuted. Go ahead, Sandy.
Did you read 30? Or you want to skip 30?
Oh, you can read 30 and 31, Sandy. Thank you for volunteering. Go for it.
And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go worship the Lord as you said."
Okay, so this begins the kind of, thank you, Sandy, for reading. This begins the rushed frenzy where the Egyptians essentially tell the Jews, get the hell out of here, right? We're tired of all of these plagues. We've tried to hold on the best that we can. We can't do it. And we don't want you to wait one more moment. Get out of Egypt. Which, by the way, the ideal or the goal of this process was not creating a just Egyptian society, which I think is fascinating, right? The idea wasn't that Egyptians become humbled enough to allow Jews to feel equal to them in Egyptian society. The goal was specifically this. We were being told night after night after night by Aaron and Moses that God was going to create a situation where we were going to be released from bondage. We were going to be redeemed out back to the land of milk and honey. And then it comes and we are largely unprepared as a people, right? We are largely unprepared. Moses promises us this kind of redemption again and again and again. And it doesn't seem like the Jewish people treat it very seriously, even though we see all of these plagues befalling our Egyptian counterparts. Who would like to read verse 32? All right, I'll take it over. As it happens, I know how to read English. Not well, so bear with me. Verse 32, take also your flocks and your herds, as you said, and be gone, and may you bring blessing upon me also. Uvarachtem gam oti, which is a strange way for Pharaoh to end this exchange with Moses and Aaron, right? get out of here, and please leave a positive Yelp review about your stay in Egypt, right? That would really be helpful to us if you put down a positive Yelp review. Please leave a blessing on your way out the door. The Egyptians were so troubled by all of this, they urged the people on, V'tichazek Mitzrayim ala'am, which this language is so rich, we could talk just about this verse over and over again. The Egyptians in the Hebrew applied pressure, or they made it harsher on Israel to hurry, right? They're not making it harsher on us to stay and to enslave us. Now they're making it harsher on us to hurry, to get out. Impatient to have them leave the country, they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks about their shoulders. So I have to tell you that this is how you know that we are the descendants of these Jewish people in this story, is that of all of the details of getting ready for Egypt, getting ready to leave Egypt, of getting ready for the wilderness, this long travel in the desert for 40 years, of all of the details we remember and we record in the Torah, the one thing we remember is that we didn't have time to properly pack our lunch boxes, right? We remember what we ate. And this is actually a trope over and over again in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh. If you look up the story in the book of Samuel book 2, about David bringing the Mishkan, bringing the tabernacle up to Jerusalem for the first time, they remember it, and we remember the Kiddush that David served. And it was a joyous event. Same thing with Solomon. Solomon dedicates the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and he serves fig cakes. And we remember the fig cakes and the wine, and that's what we remember from the party. So to us, food really matters. It defines our holidays. It defines when we're being festive. It defines when we're under this kind of lachatz, this kind of pressure, right? We're not allowed to properly prepare food, and it bothers us even till today. And to be honest, it bothers us today literally because I don't know anybody whose stomach is not bothered by matzah. So we literally bother ourselves. We agitate ourselves with the food that we eat on Pesach. I always have one person who raises their hand in class and says, but I love matzah, Rabbi. I eat matzah all during the year. And I always very politely say, different strokes for different folks. Thank you for sharing. So if you're that person, just know that I know there are Jews who like matzah, and know that I'm not one of them. So the Israelites, I'll just finish out the page and give everybody a chance to recoup and take a drink of water so that you can read on the next page. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians what they needed, silver, gold, clothing, and all that actually gets contributed in due time to the building of the tabernacle. Now, so that is everything that happened on the day. And then there's this strange verse. This strange verse. Now, this is a frame from the film of the Ten Commandments. And they reference it. They reference what we're going to talk about in one line in the movie, The Ten Commandments. And it's one verse in the Torah, in the book of Exodus during this process. This is about the children of Israel leaving. Anybody like to read this verse with gusto? I feel like somebody just unmuted. I heard it.
Oh, actually, I unmuted, and I will read that. But
sure. You have a question?
I was also struck by the fact, maybe I've just never paid attention to this, that the Israelites borrowed gold and jewels from the Egyptians. What exactly does that mean?
Well,
hey, our God is going to kill your firstborn and we're getting out of here, but will you lend me your gold?
It actually happens to us every time we visit with Egypt. Abraham and Sarah also go down to Egypt, and I don't know if you remember, I had a Tanakh professor once who called it the Sister Act movies, right? There's three, there's Sister Act 1, Sister Act 2, Sister Act 3. Abraham and Sarah first go down to Egypt and say, she's my sister. Then they go to Avimelech, Melech Grar, and they say, and Abraham says, she's my sister. And then Yitzchak goes and does the same exact story with Rivka. And every time the story ends with the king disparaging them, saying, you did this wrong, it's terrible, I won't forgive you. And here's a lot of wealth to leave with. Abraham and Sarah kind of fall backwards into their wealth over the course of their lives. Every mistake that they make seemingly makes them wealthier than before. And here as well, it seems like the Egyptian, without the Jewish people necessarily demanding it along the way, the Egyptians know that this will hurry the process. And it also, by the way, answers a lot of questions in terms of where we got the stuff for our desert travels, which is a question that you should have all while reading Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. Where did all this stuff come from? And it's clear here that a lot of it was borrowed. When we say borrowed, it's the type of borrowing that where we don't return it. And a lot of it Jewish people seem to have in terms of the flocks. We know that we came down with flocks. So not everybody was stomping in the mud the entire time as a slave. And I think that period of slavery, for me at least, is always far more complicated than we give it credit for in terms of what biblical slavery looked like. And I think people falsely always associate it with kind of American Southern, or African American experience, I should say, but I don't think the two are related in that way in terms of, if we began to draw a picture in our mind, they're not exactly the same. Thank you for pointing that out, Sally. If you could read verse 19.
Sure. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you.
Great. There's this one verse in the middle of our Exodus, in the middle of our redemption. And the verse is that Moses took with him, Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef, that Moses took Joseph's bones. Here is a picture. You can look at the blue arrow. That's how it's depicted in the 10 Commandments in the movie. One of the, for me at least, it's sad that American Jewish University might be sold. And the saddest part about it to me is the library, which is one of my favorite places to learn in the entire world. And in the library, there's the rare books room, which is a place where I was never allowed to enter as a rabbinical student, but now in my PhD studies, I've been welcomed there many times, and it's an amazing collection of rare books. And one of the rarest books, or my opinion, one of the most special books of the entire library collection, is actually one of the original scripts of the 10 Commandments marked up by Orson Welles, where somebody has gone through and written the midrashic connection of all of the different scenes. So it relates all of his decisions as a filmmaker to the rabbinic literature that it's based on. And I have to tell you that, that's never on display, but the question of what happens to all these books is one that's not for our study session right now. But here we see it playing out. This is a midrash that clearly he read, or this is a verse in the Torah that clearly he read, and he is interpreting it just like midrash. He is interpreting it in this way, where you see the children of Israel carrying this body, clearly wrapped, let's just say, right, as a traditional Egyptian, mummified burial. And that's what the Torah tells us at the end of the book of Genesis, at the end of Sefer Bereshit, that Joseph is buried in this way. His body is prepared in this way. And so here we see this kind of one mention that everybody was leaving Egypt, and Moses remembered Joseph, who made his brothers and his brothers' children promise that they would not forget him when they left Egypt, right? That they would remember to bring him out during the redemption as well. All right. So thank you everybody for reading to this point. Now we get to my section, right? The Babylonian Talmud. And this is a section from Sota, which is a tractate about infidelity and keeping oaths and how we know, and this is where this conversation appears. Okay. And please, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to unmute and call out to me, and or you can enter it in the chat. I haven't seen anything in the chat. I prefer to unmute and say something actually than write it in the chat. So here we go. From where? From where did Moses, our teacher, know where Joseph was buried? I don't know if anybody's ever stopped to think right? How did this all unfold that suddenly Joseph's bones were being carried out of Egypt the morning of the first day of Pesach, meaning to say the morning after the first Seder? So the first Seder happens, and then presumably all the children of Israel are rushing around to prepare to leave. And then in the morning, we all leave, and we're carrying Joseph's bones. And how did that happen? Amru, so the sages say, Serach, the daughter of Asher, remained from that generation that initially descended to Egypt with Jacob. So Serach, the daughter of Asher, she is an important Midrashic character. I don't know if you've ever heard this Midrash before, but when Joseph's brothers come back from Egypt and they want to tell their father Jacob that Joseph is still alive, according to Midrash, they ask Serach to play her instrument. Supposedly she's a harp player and she's a singer. And so she begins to play and to sing a song. And this is what helps Jacob go to bed at night. This is what has helped soothe his pain in light of his losing his son. She begins to play for him a song. And in the song, she begins to reveal that Joseph is alive. And in doing so, Jacob, who loves to listen to his granddaughter play, Jacob accepts this news, right, without, any kind of, they were worried about him, a fatality or something like that, that he would have, a heart condition as a result of finding out news like this in his old age. So Serach is one of these comforting figures in rabbinic literature. And just like last night or yesterday afternoon, these 2 days are kind of becoming one giant blur. Yesterday afternoon, I taught to the sister leadership and the Chazak leadership that Yocheved is remembered in rabbinic literature in Seder Olam Bara, which is Rabbah, which is one of the first midrashic collections from the 2nd century. That Yocheved, Moses' mother, is remembered as one of the people who merits coming down into Egypt and leaving, which means that Moses' mother walked the journey with Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and she should be understood in the text, in the subtext, that she was there in the background. So too Serach, this harp player, this beautiful calming force throughout the text, throughout the end of the book of Genesis, she is also credited with having left Egypt. And she's somebody that we ascribe this ability. She has answers. She knows about our tradition. So Moses went to her and he said to her, did somebody unmute and want to ask me a question? No. Okay. Somebody just unmuted by accident. Moses went to her and he said to her, do you know anything about where Joseph is buried? So he goes to her as a kind of oracle. I have a problem. I know that we are supposed to, right, bring Joseph's bones out of Egypt when we all leave. And the responsibility of this does not necessarily only belong to Moses. It does not only belong to Moses. But the verse up above reads, Vayikach Moshe et atzmat Yosef, and Moses took with him the bones of Joseph. It doesn't say that the children of Israel remembered their oath. It says, and Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, quite literally, the children of Jacob, his father. He exacts this oath from his brothers. And so the responsibility falls on Moses to do this. And she says to him, the Egyptians fashioned a metal casket from him and set it in the Nile River as an augury so that its water would be blessed. Now, I have to tell you, I have to confess, I know that synagogue is not a place for confession, but I was looking for what a picture would be to show you an augury, and I felt like they were too creepy to put into this presentation. So we have a picture of the Nile River. We don't have a picture of an augury of metal caskets buried like that. So Moses went and stood on the bank of the Nile. Moses said, Yosef, Yosef, higia ha'et. Joseph, Joseph, the time has arrived in which the Holy One, blessed be he or she, took an oath saying that I, God, will redeem you. our Haggadah is actually very careful to give the credit of redemption not to Moses. If you pay attention during the reading of the Haggadah, during the Seder, we give all the credit to God. The more traditional your Haggadah gets, the less that Moses is ever mentioned and the more that God is mentioned. And here in the Midrash, we see that this sleight of hand has already occurred, right? Whereas the text of the Torah states that Moses took Joseph's bones, here we already see that Moses calls out to Joseph, who is buried somewhere in the Nile, and explains that the time has come and that the oath, that God's oath, not the children of Israel's oath, God's oath to redeem Joseph, that transfer has already occurred. It is time for that oath to be redeemed as well, to be remembered, to be fulfilled. V'higia hashvuah, and the time for fulfillment of the oath that you administer to the Jewish people, that they will bury you in Eretz Yisrael, has arrived. If you show yourself, it's good. And if you don't show yourself, then we are clear from the oath, right? Suddenly, the responsibility of the moment, the responsibility of this oath is transferred back onto Joseph's shoulders. Moses says to Joseph, right, I've come this far. I'm standing in the Nile River. I've done my absolute best at redeeming the oath. You have to meet me halfway, which is kind of like the end of the Chosen movie, right? You remember the end of the Chosen movie where the father says, I'll come halfway, you meet me the rest. This is, or you come halfway, I meet you the rest. I might have just butchered that line, excuse me. But here we have Moses calling out to Joseph. And what is Pesach about? What is Pesach about, if not, Bechol Dor Vador Chayav Adam Lirot, every generation we shall see ourselves. And Pesach is about connecting the generations to acknowledge that we who sit at the table right now are actually connecting with generations behind us, generations in front of us, because all of us were redeemed from Egypt. I feel like somebody unmuted to talk to me, or unmuted and just wanted us to know what television is on in the background. Would somebody like to ask a question?
This is Elaine Gill. I would like to ask you a question. You commented that in some Haggadot, if you will, that Moses is infrequently mentioned and others he's never mentioned. Well, in my upbringing and as an adult, I thought that Moses was never mentioned, and that was one of the ironies of the whole Haggadah and the whole story. So
that's right. So traditionally,
expound on that a little.
Traditionally speaking, you're absolutely right. And today, more and more, the Haggadot mention Moses or show Moses, Moses and Aaron, and even in Haggadot today, mention Miriam and give credit. There's all kinds of new age and more liberal Haggadot, and I'm just pointing out for those of us who remember traditional Haggadot that there was a time where this midrash reflects that same exact sensibility, right? Where even Moses, who's standing in the Nile River calling out to Joseph, he will not ultimately receive the credit for this, according to the midrash. And so that was the point I was trying to make. But
I get your point. I just said that it was always a subject for discussion.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Why is he not there? So.
And I think, in all honesty, I think that those catalysts for conversation that sit there on the Pesach table, including in the Haggadah, for why Moses is not there, including all of the questions about the Seder table and the Seder plate, when we endeavor to answer them, when we add Moses in, or when we put additional props all over the Seder table, just like we do, whether it be a Miriam cup or an orange or this or that, like all the kinds of different, my kids' projects, right? My whole, my parents' Seder table looks like a display window that you would see at the VBS day school right here, right? It's all the kids' Passover projects through the years. And, but when you do that, when you answer that question, you also, you answer it and you resolve the question, and you also create a problem in the sense that it's supposed to be an evening where we acknowledge these questions and we try to answer them, right? And so So that's clearly what the traditional text was always trying to do, was trying to create this kind of moment where we ask ourselves, wait a second, where is Moses in this evening, or where is Aaron, or where is Miriam? And the more that we answer that, we actually prevent generations from asking that same exact question. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope so. So after that, Miyad Saf Arono Shel Yosef. Immediately, the casket of Joseph floated to the top of the water. So Moses calls out to Joseph, and Joseph answers the call, and the casket floats to the top of the Nile River. In an alternative section, on the next, as the section of Talmud continues, Rabbi Natan, and my Hebrew name is Natan, but I didn't write this. So Rabbi Natan says, Bekavranit, right? Joseph was buried in a crypt of kings. So if you see this Hebrew word, right? Kavranit, this kind of crypt described in the Talmud. What's interesting academically is that Rabbi Natan has never seen an Egyptian burial site. I can tell you that right now, right? So what is he talking about when he says a royal crypt? What is the thing that he's imagining? Then he's imagining something that is more Greco-Roman in nature, right? Can everybody understand that? So he's imagining that Joseph was buried in a kind of Greco-Roman crypt a la Indiana Jones, okay? Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade goes and reveals these kinds of crypts. Moses went and stood by the crypt of kings and said, Joseph, the time has arrived. So the same kind of story unfolds, but it's a different envisioning of where Joseph is and what happens. So Moses says almost exactly verbatim the same exact thing. The time for fulfillment of the oath that you administer to the Jewish people, they'll bury you in Eretz Yisrael, has arrived. If you show yourself, it's good. And if not, we're basically clear and free from the oath, right? And at that moment, the casket of Joseph shook among the caskets, and Moses took it. Moses understood which casket to pull. He pulls that one and brought it over to himself, and presumably brought it for the redemption. The question is, how does this midrash, how does the process of Torah to midrash give us a sense? What does it teach us once we know what Moses was doing on the evening of the first Passover? David Spiegel wrote to me, so on Pesach, we give praise to God for redeeming us. On Purim, God is not even mentioned. Can you discuss? I could discuss that for an entire semester course, David. Yes, and I will say that I believe that over the course of the Jewish calendar year, we experience a certain growth, or we're ideally experiencing a certain growth of perspective. We could talk about this in a greater sense in terms of the entire calendar, but we begin in Pesach in a holiday where we absolutely completely relied on God to help us through actually God's entering the physical world and altering natural laws in order for the world to understand that God was with the Jewish people. And that process progresses all the way through the entire calendar year, right? Through Shavuot, where God reveals the Torah, and through Sukkot, then we have to actually build ourselves the hut in which we interact with God, to Hanukkah, right? Where there is a question of two different miracles that are occurring almost at the same time, right? Is the question the oil story that you heard as a child, or is the question the ability of a small group of Jews to actually throw off the shackles of a foreign force in the land of Israel, to Purim, where it is the exact opposite of Passover by the end of the year. In Purim, we take on the responsibility of making people aware that we are in relationship with God, in spite of the fact that God does not present God's self in the story of Esther whatsoever. And that's how the rabbis understand Kimu v'Kiblu, that finally, by Megillat Esther, we not only accept the Torah and accept the responsibility of Jewish identity, we actually establish it for other people to understand that we will stand up for Jewish identity, irrespective of whether God saves us or not. Now I see the chat is filling up. Lana Zimmerman. It's interesting that God is fulfilling a promise, and so is Moses. Sometimes it takes a long time until promises can be fulfilled. That's exactly right. That's the truth, Alana. That's the truth with people. It's the truth with God. It's the truth with family. Sometimes it takes a long time for people to fulfill promises. Great point. So I'm going to just begin this process of wrapping it up over the course of the next 20 minutes, and then we can pause and reflect on the teaching a little bit, and I can continue to take questions, or I'll continue to read them in the chat. But what do we do with this teaching as we prepare over the course of the next, 3.5 weeks for Passover, as we reflect as we physically prepare, right? I'm sure that next week I'm going to begin schlepping boxes out of the garage up to the kitchen and begin schlepping stuff from the kitchen down to the garage, and spiritually preparing, putting myself in the mindset that, I have to end the month of Adar and begin the month of Nisan, begin kind of the spiritual new year for the Jewish people, as the Torah puts it. We don't think of it that way because we don't need tickets to come to the Rosh Chodesh Nisan event here at Shul. We need tickets to come to the Rosh Chodesh event for Tishrei. But according to the Torah, this begins our spiritual new year, Nisan, that leads to Passover. And the idea here is that Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moses is called our rabbi, and the rabbis clearly transpose that title back onto him. That's not a title that he carries in the Torah itself. Moshe Rabbeinu is with the Jewish people for the Seder, and he's with the Jewish people in the morning for the Exodus. And in the evening time, he has to carry the responsibilities of the Jewish people that are not being met. There's an aspect of leadership, a glimpse of leadership here that we can all learn from, because I bet you that all of us do this in one way or another for somebody else. All of us kind of try to fill in the gaps where we can to try to help make somebody else's Passover experience, somebody else's Jewish experience, Jewish life a little bit better. And so here, what we see in rabbinic leadership is that what it means sometimes is that while everybody else is preparing for themselves, we have to think a little bit more broadly in terms of what preparation is needed. Moses is the one, he didn't make that promise to Joseph, and yet somehow the promise falls on his shoulders. And perhaps in this evening, he merits to be the one to walk to the top of Mount Sinai to accept the Torah for us. Because while he is not a descendant of Joseph, right? He is a descendant of Levi. He understands that it's his responsibility to make good on all the promises from all the different tribes. The Jewish enterprise is not a tribal one. The Jewish enterprise is one big familial one, right? We're not a people of 12 tribes. We're a people of one heart and one mind. And we're a people of family. And so in that sense, it leads into this idea of togetherness. It leads into the sense that, right, in these moments of great challenge, in these moments where we are uncertain of our future, what is most important in those moments is to remember our past and to make good on the previous promises in order to build a new future. Because Moses in this evening sits in a kind of crossroads, thank God, that the Jewish people has not had to experience many times over. And yet, in Jewish institutional life, it feels like we meet these crossroads all the time. And Moses sets a good example for us, actually, all the time as well. And the last thing I want to point out in this teaching, is this kind of theme of oaths. Here in the rabbinic text, The word that's used for oath is Shavuah. And it's actually the tractate in the Talmud. It's a rabbinic term. So if you go to the tractate that's called Shavuot, you might think that you're reading a tractate of Talmud about the holiday of Shavuot in which we eat cheesecake. I can just tell you everything you need to know about that holiday. Cheesecake is delicious. But that is not what that tractate of the Talmud is about. It's actually about oaths. It's actually about making promises and getting out of promises, and what extreme should we, go to make somebody hold to promises. And it's interesting here that there's a tie between Passover, in my opinion, and another holiday in Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we call oaths not Shavuot. We call oaths something different. Does anybody know the word that comes to mind on Yom Kippur? It's called neder, which is actually a biblical term. And that is why the service is called Kol Nidre. Does everybody hear that? The word neder as oath and Kol Nidre, all of the oaths that I've promised or that I will promise, right? For those that, please forgive me, for those that I've not fulfilled. So Passover is I like to explain, Passover is the holiday of pots and pans, right? For everything about Passover, there's a prop that we can use to help us. There's a Seder plate, there's a script, there's a Haggadah, there's all kinds of different items on the Passover table. There's all kinds of different food. Everything about Passover is experiential. Yom Kippur is the holiday with no pots and pans. Yom Kippur is literally a holiday with no eating. And it's the holiday where the reflection and the work has to be done internally. And yet this midrash seems to bind Passover and Yom Kippur and say that the preparation for Pesach is not just of the external nature. It's not just in making food and in gathering the jewelry for the Exodus and in slaughtering the animal and eating together for the Seder and in preparing for the journey. Because sometimes Passover is also about reflecting on the oaths and reflecting on the promises and reflecting on our nature internally. For me, I see this in so many ways play out each and every year on Passover. Passover is complicated because Passover is a family holiday, right? Just like Thanksgiving. So we sit at a long table filled with people who we can't wait to see, and when sitting around people who also are always there, always at the Passover table. And I'm not going to ask for everybody to go around in this teaching and explain who are the people that you are looking forward to seeing and who are the people that you are not as much looking forward to seeing around your Passover table. But for most of us, there are these people who sit at the Passover table as fixtures, right? Who one would think perhaps, maybe it's not the best anymore. We're not so looking forward. And they sit there because we have promises. We have obligations as a family and as a people. And I also see Passover as a family holiday because each and every year, Passover is the most difficult holiday for my students in the conversion process, because they have no familial table to join in terms of this holiday. And so the connection between Passover and Yom Kippur is the fact that on one, we're trying to nullify our oaths and our obligations. And on the other, right, we try to make good on oaths and obligations. When we still lived in Chicago, when I was growing up, there were people who used to come to our Seder table who literally we inherited, right? They went to my grandparents' Seder, and then after my grandparents had passed away, somehow they ended up at our Seder, even though there was no relationship left, right? My parents always used to say, but where would they go for Passover, right? What would they do for Passover? As if, there was only our table for them. And that taught us an important lesson, right? That bechol dor vador chayav adam, that in every generation, there are obligations that a person has. It's not just to see yourself as if you were redeemed from Egypt. That's not the only obligation on Passover. The obligation is to the Jewish community, is to fellow Jews, to make sure that everybody gets 4 cups of wine, to make sure that in every home, all the food is eaten, right? To make sure that the Paschal lamb is finished in each and every home. There are obligations that we feel on Passover that we don't talk about enough. Bein b'nei Yisrael leb'nei Yisrael. Bein am la'am. Between people within our family, within our people. And those oaths and those promises mean just as much as the promise to clean out our kitchens and to make a Seder, right? The bigger question is always, how are we going to fill our table? Who are we going to invite? Not just what are we going to make? And I know we all like talking about what we're going to make. And I know all of your briskets are the best brisket in the entire world, right? Nobody's ever tasted your brisket, a brisket like your brisket. Believe me, I understand. And I look forward to tasting all of your briskets. And I want to tell you that we should be just as mindful to make sure that our tables are filled with guests who otherwise wouldn't be at a Passover table because we have obligations. Now, I have a couple questions here in the chat. 1238 opens a remarkable opportunity to discuss inclusion of the Hebrews, and a great mixture went with them, presumably Egyptians and others linked to themselves to the Hebrews. They are our ancestors. Right, there was an Erev Rav, there was a mixed multitude that went out, and we certainly welcomed them in terms of inclusiveness, and they caused a great deal of tsuris for us all through the process. It's fascinating if we looked at all of the psukim, all the different verses of Erev Rav when they are included. And I would tell you that my advisor for my PhD, what she does to study different topics or different characters in the Tanakh and the Hebrew Bible, is that she'll pull out every verse where they're named and read them in order. And that might skip a lot of verses, right? And if you just read them in terms of when they're named or when the pronoun is used to refer to them, right? Or when they're the subject of a sentence, it actually paints a very different picture than just reading a snippet here and a snippet there and a snippet here and a snippet there. You get a kind of a more fleshed out sense of a story. Erev Rav is one of those incredible, thought processes where we say, what is the Torah trying to tell us about Erev Rav? I actually think it's complex and it is inclusive, and at the same time it is kind of polemical, and it's a great point, especially during Passover, to think about how there have always been people outside of the Jewish people who have been peripherally included, and how we should always be welcoming as a people, as a family. All right, Sally Weber writes in, I'm trying to do my best Larry King. Sally Weber from Encino writes in, everybody, Richard Friedman wrote after a book, either a book or an article years ago on the vanishing face of God, looking exactly at how God intentionally began withdrawing his face as the Israelites increasingly incorporated his presence inside themselves. And I would say that that kind of thought process has influenced me. And of course, I think that thought process is reflected in not only in the writings of Friedman, but in the writings of Heschel and in the writings of lots of theologians, that as kind of we grew up and matured, we begin to take care of ourselves more, right? And we rely on God to take care of us a little bit less, no different than when a child grows up over the course of time. And I think if you look at Jewish history over time, right, if we begin with slavery and Exodus, and we continue through modern day state of Israel, we get to a sense that we have grown up into a people that can take care of ourselves in a beautiful way. And now we encounter new types of challenges as a people that's empowered to run our own state with our own self-determination. And those new challenges are an amazing topic for future generations. You mentioned that Passover is always difficult for conversion individuals. How so? Great question, because it's a family holiday, and because they don't have family, they don't have a family Seder to attend. And so they're always looking to be included in somebody else's Seder. They oftentimes will rely on the generosity of people who have very set, stable, let's say Passover Seder life, to open the door to them and to invite them in, because Passover is not conceptual. Yom Kippur is conceptual, right? If they can walk into services and understand on Yom Kippur that if they wear white and open a machzor and just stay quiet and allow themselves to reflect, they understand what that would be like, in a sense. All of it is always challenging, but Pesach is not abstract. Pesach is these things sitting on the table, and the way that you and I imagine it is entirely based on the way that we have seen it over and over and over again growing up, to the sense that, I remember once, I think as a wedding gift, we got a Nambi a Passover Seder plate. I don't know if anybody even knows what a Nambi Passover Seder, right? And it was very modern, very artistic. And to me, it did not look anything like a Seder plate, right? And I said when we opened it, I said to my wife, right, we'll never use this. It was a gift to us, right? But it didn't look anything like the Seder plate that my mom used growing up. It didn't look anything like the Seder plate that my wife used growing up. It didn't look like a Seder plate. So I apologize to everybody here in the group that uses Nambi Seder plates. I don't mean to say to insult your Seder plates. But I think Doug just raised his hand that he uses Nambi Seder plates.
No.
No, okay, great. Thank you.
Different question.
So, different question.
I want to go back to this concept of, the conversion, the people who are trying to convert and being invited to Seders. We read in the beginning of the Haggadah, Halach Ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, let all who are hungry come here and eat. It's an obligation imposed on us, to invite whoever can't, doesn't have a place to attend to attend. And that's recited in Aramaic because I think the Midrash is that the angels don't speak Aramaic. This is a human responsibility.
Right. No, it's written in Aramaic so that it was the language at the time, right? So that people would understand it and they would understand the colloquial nature of it. You're 100% right. And I would suggest, Doug, your family might be far more righteous than mine, but I would suggest that when we open our doors and say, let all who are hungry come and eat, if we opened our doors and there were people who rushed to our front door in the moment, I wouldn't want anybody to be videotaping my face in that moment, but I think it would be, we say it because we know that it's the right thing, and practicing it is something entirely different. So I would hope, every year before Passover, we send out an email to the community asking for people to volunteer who have an extra space at their Passover Seder. And every year we have people who step forward and volunteer, and every year it's not enough. And so I would hope that, in this community, that we would also have many people who are in the conversion process and learning about Judaism and wanting to experience a Seder. And there would be such an overwhelming response to that kind of call for spaces at a Passover Seder that we wouldn't have the issue. We would all be acting with all of our goodness toward halach ma'anya, with the best of intentions and with the best of actions. The Haggadah calls for our best of intentions. And I think, right, it's to inspire us for our best of actions. If we can get there, then Passover is a success, right? Then Passover is transformative. And we've not only observed the letter of the law in creating the Seder, we've actually observed the spirit of the law in experiencing this kind of metamorphosis of spirit from those of us who feel enslaved or in a dark place or in a narrow place, Mitzrayim, that's what it means, to those of us who feel like we are redeemed and we are in the openness, a world filled with possibility. I want to thank everybody for coming. We had one more question, and I'm a sucker for questions.
No, I was just this whole way of thinking about it doesn't include just potential Jews by choice, or Jews by choice, but I'm thinking of people who live alone, elderly people, because we've had people at our Seder who literally had no other Seder to go to, but grew up with the tradition of Seders, might have led their own Seders,
Right.
but now are in a place in life where that's not available. This teaching has been wonderful, and I'm writing down questions for our Seder. So thank you.
Oh, you're very
Also,
well.
I
You're very
think
welcome.
all synagogues do that,
Yeah.
whoever has room at your Seder, please invite those who can't come.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I want to thank everybody for spending this hour with me. Your lunch hour. I want to thank you for spending the hour learning. This is one of my favorite things to do with the congregation is teaching. And I look forward. Thank you to everybody who has come up and introduced yourself over the last day and a half. And I look forward to getting to know everybody a little bit better. And so have a wonderful week. Shavua Tov. And
Yasher
let's start
Koach.
getting ready for Passover.
Yasher Koach.
Beautiful.
Baruch
Yeah.
Tiyah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.